Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha, Khanna. For well over a week now, the diplomatic tussle between India and Canada has been intensifying ever since Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused India of being involved in the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in that country without sharing any credible evidence. Since day one, India has dismissed the allegations as absurd, politically motivated and driven by prejudice. Now, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has set the record straight in no uncertain terms. Speaking at the Council for Foreign Relations in New York, Dr. Jaishankar said, India does not engage in such acts as a matter of policy. Significantly, he also drew attention to the issue of organized crime in Canada, particularly that which was linked to secessionist forces, violence and extremism. He also expressed concern about Canada's apparent willingness to tolerate such activities for political reasons. India has categorically rejected Canada's baseless allegations, emphasizing that the Trudeau administration has yet to provide any evidence to support its claim. In fact, Jaishankar has assured Canada that India will take action if it is provided with specific information about Nijjar's killing. He added that India is open to looking at it. The foreign minister said, and I quote, "We told the Canadians this is not the government of India's policy. Secondly, we said if you have something specific, if you have something relevant, let us know. We're open to looking at it." He went on to say, the picture is not complete without the context. You also have to appreciate that in the last few years, Canada has seen a lot of organized crime relating to secessionist forces, violence and extremism. They're all very, very deeply mixed up. He said India has been badgering the Canadians about the fact that organized criminals are based there, a reference to separatists like Nijjar, and that India has made a large number of extradition requests, none of which have been accepted by Canada. Earlier on Tuesday, while addressing the UN General Assembly, Jaishankar called on UN member states to resist political convenience in their response to terrorism and violence. His remarks were widely seen as a strong message to both Canada and China. He added, respect for territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs cannot be exercises in cherry picking. The era of a few nations setting the agenda for the rest of the world is over. Remember, in recent days, the Indian government has flagged what it's termed as politically condoned hate crimes and criminal violence in Canada, a country which is home to a large and politically influential Sikh community, which is expected to play a major role in that country's next general election in 2025. Meanwhile, the Canadian envoy to the United Nations in his address to the General Assembly said, and I quote, "We cannot bend the rules of state-to-state relations for political expediency because we've seen and continue to see the extent to which democracies are under threat through various means of foreign interference." Let's now shift our focus to Indian agencies continuing crackdown on Khalistani elements. The National Investigation Agency today raided multiple locations across Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh. Gangster-turned-terrorist Arsh Dala's aide, Sundar alias Jora, was arrested. NI maintains that Khalistani elements and gangsters based in other countries, particularly Canada, have been funding overground workers in India through Hawala channels for drugs, weapons as well as terror acts. Not only that, a link between the Khalistan movement and Pakistan's ISI has also come to the fore. ISI has been providing funds to intensify Khalistani and anti-India activities in Canada. As is well known, emboldened by their rising clout in Canada, pro-Khalistani extremists have been openly intimidating minority Hindus in that country. They've repeatedly threatened Indian diplomats and vandalized India's missions. Additionally, dossiers maintained by India's intelligence agencies show that Punjab today suffers heavily because of extortion rackets run from Canada. Gangsters based in Canada bring drugs from Pakistan through drones and sell them across Punjab. A part of this money goes right back to these Khalistani extremists in Canada. Also, the targeted killings of Sikhs, Hindus and Christians in Punjab since 2016 were the handiwork of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and his allies. And these elements have given calls for balkanization of India. But guess what? Canada has not acted in a single case. And there is yet another report that paints a very grim picture of how these pro-Khalistan extremists in Canada have been luring gullible Sikh youth by sponsoring their visas with the sole objective of using them to carry out their agenda on Canadian soil. Men like Nijjar have been involved in these activities. They came out with a novel idea of sponsoring gullible Sikh youth from Punjab for medium-skilled jobs like those of plumbers, truck drivers and religious work at Gurudwaras controlled by them. And then they exploit these young men and make them participate in anti-India protests and conduct radical religious congregations. They also identify Indian students in Canada who are finding it difficult to sustain themselves and need support in terms of sundry jobs and shelter. Illegal immigrants in Canada who do not have jobs are the most susceptible. This human trafficking channel run by pro-Khalistani extremists remains undisrupted under the very nose of Canadian agencies, even though that country claims it is very sensitive to human trafficking. The question we're asking on Global Lens tonight is this. Even as India waits for Canada to share credible evidence backing its allegations against the former, will you, Mr. Trudeau, walk the talk? Stop condoning terrorism and secessionism and begin cracking down on anti-India, extremist and violent forces that have been operating from Canadian soil for decades with total impunity.
I know. I'll share with you very frankly what we told the Canadians. One, we told the Canadians that this is not the government of India's policy. Two, we told the Canadians saying that, look, if you have something specific, if you have something relevant, let us know. We are open to looking at it. So, but to understand the context of it, in a way, because the picture is not complete without the context in a way, you also have to appreciate, Ken, that in the last few years, Canada actually has seen a lot of organized crime, relating to, the secessionist forces, organized crime, violence, extremism. They're all very, very deeply mixed up. So, in fact, we have been, talking about specifics and information. We have actually been badgering the Canadians. We have given them a lot of information about organized crime leadership, which operates out of Canada. There are a large number of extradition requests. There are terrorist leaders who have been identified. So do understand that there is an environment out there. So that is important in a way to factor in. If you have to understand what is going on out there. And our concern is that it's really been very permissive because of political reasons. So we have a situation where actually our diplomats are threatened, our consulates have been attacked, and often comments are made about there's interference in our politics, and a lot of this is often justified as saying, well, that's how democracies work.
Respect for territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs cannot be exercises in cherry picking. When reality departs from the rhetoric, we must have the courage to call it out. Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust. This is very much the sentiment of the Global South. We must never again allow an injustice like vaccine apartheid to recur. Climate action, too, cannot continue to witness an evasion of historical responsibilities. The power of markets should not be utilized to steer food and energy from the needy to the wealthy. Nor must we countenance that political convenience determines responses to terrorism, extremism, and violence.
All right. Lots to unpack on this show. Let me introduce our guest. Joining us from Canada tonight is Daniel Boardman, senior journalist with the National Telegraph in Canada. Daniel, welcome to Global Lens. Also,
thank you so much for having me.
Also joining us, as always, is Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Daniel, let me start with you. I have already outlined what India's External Affairs Minister has said, the stand that India has taken on these charges from day one, the fact that Justin Trudeau hasn't bothered to share any evidence with India so far backing these claims, and the fact that India over the years has presented dossier after dossier to Canadian authorities detailing multiple illicit, violent, extremist and terror activities that a lot of these Khalistani elements in Canada have been engaging in with impunity, and Canada has chosen to look the other way. Not to mention the fact that Trudeau is repeatedly accused of catering to this particular constituency for cynical vote bank politics. The question that we're asking here in India is, Mr. Trudeau, if you've made those wild charges against India, surely you should be sharing some evidence with us. Where is that evidence? How is this story being viewed in Canada, Daniel?
Unfavorably, to say the least. His polling numbers took a dive. The only thing that's saving him from this story in Canada is another monumental screw-up on his part when his party invited a literal Nazi who fought in the Waffen-SS to Parliament, gave him a standing ovation. At the same time, Volodymyr Zelensky was visiting. They didn't vet this guy. And then he denied it, said, oh, it's just Russian disinformation, the thing you saw with your own eyes. And then the Liberals started to say, you know what? Let's just strike this one from the record. They did that on Yom Kippur, a Jewish holiday, so where Jews couldn't participate. And then the next day, the speaker resigned, and Justin Trudeau still doesn't take responsibility for bringing in a literal Nazi. And remember, Justin Trudeau is very fond of calling anyone who doesn't support him alt-right, far-right, neo-Nazis, like the trucker protest. So there's a new scandal that's taken over Canada for Justin Trudeau's incompetence. But to this scandal, it's not well received. Canadians love to be seen as America's polite younger brother. They're the crazy ones. We're the reasonable ones. Everyone loves us. When Americans travel, they put Canadian flags on their backpack because we're so loved. And now that we have 1.5 billion people very angry at us for obvious reasons, it does not do well with the Canadian psyche. And I mean, the rant, or I call it a rant. What you did off the top, it's like a rant I've been doing for 5 years on trying to expose this, the Khalistani gang violence and all this and the support of it. There were rumors. It was like one of those well-known secrets in politics when you could sign up people in cash for the political parties, because it's not about vote bank politics. It's not about votes with the Sikhs. It's not. More Sikhs are anti-Khalistani than pro-Khalistani. Stephen Harper grew the Sikh vote in the Conservative Party. It's about money and the illicit money coming in through all the stuff you outlined, right? There were always stories of how the Khalistanis got into politics at first hand, just walking into the Pakistani embassy, walking out with just bags of cash to sign up random people. And we had to get rid of cash signups to the party because of it. So this has been a long-standing problem. And it's not just an Indian problem. This is where I get so incredibly frustrated. It's not Canada doing nothing to help India, which it is. It's Canada doing nothing to help Canada. The Khalistani movement is the biggest, the Khalistani extremists are the worst terrorists in Canadian history. Their India bombing is the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history. That was an absolute miscarriage of justice, the fact that we only got one guy and he spent 15 minutes in jail. It's a joke, right? It allowed the Khalistani movement to grow. And of course he's sympathetic to the Khalistani. He brought Jasper Atwal, a man convicted in Canadian courts of trying to assassinate an Indian diplomat and Canadians. So this guy is convicted in our court system, not your court system, not Botswana or Australia, Canadian courts. Found this guy guilty of attempted murder in a terrorist attack of an Indian government official. He then gets invited to India in 2018 with the Liberals, right? It's gone too far. We had Ramesh Sangha, another Sikh Liberal MP, call out the fact that, there's a Khalistani element in high levels of Liberal cabinet. He was kicked out of the party. So we've had this going on for years and years, and I get so frustrated with the Liberals who pretend they're the great purveyors of diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're there to protect all the minorities from the evil hate speech and whatever, except when it gets difficult, because Hindus in Canada have been under siege from the Khalistanis for years and we've done nothing. This is a Canadian problem. And just because they're Indian Canadians doesn't mean they're any less Canadian, right? So if we're going to go to DEFCON 1 on India because Hardeep Singh Nijjar died, right? But we don't do anything about the thousands of Hindus that get harassed or assassinated by Khalistanis, it drives everyone mad. And, listen, I haven't seen the Five Eyes report. None of us are going to probably see that Five Eyes report. We don't know what Trudeau has in the hold. But if you look at the Washington Post report, you hit it right. Like, the real problem in Canada here is Khalistani gang violence. And it's Khalistani gangsters. And if we're going to say as a country, and this is a Justin Trudeau thing and a Jagmeet Singh thing, that the most important people in our country are Khalistani gang members, then the biggest threat to Khalistani gang members in Canada is other Khalistani gang members. So we have three scenarios of what might have happened. Either Canada it was a gang hit of a rival gang, India had nothing to do with it. This is all a nothing burger. This is just ideological infiltration of the Khalistani and the Islamist movement and the anti-India stuff within these parties festering, and we screwed up big time. Or, the other thing is it's hard evidence. We have something. We have them on tape admitting to the whole thing. But then, how did the assassination go down? It was a bunch of people who look like Sikhs, right? So the Indian government at least knew to make it look like a Khalistani gang hit, because these happen all the time. One happened a few weeks ago. This isn't an uncommon occurrence in Canada. We don't cover it in our news, so no Canadians really know about it. But I hear about it. I scream into the void. And now someone is listening, which is nice. Or, what if we have sort of a middle ground thing here? What if it's a bit more complicated? What if the Indian government did something slightly clever? What if there was an agent in Canada?
All right, we seem to have lost that link to Daniel there. We will go back to him in just a moment as soon as the link is back up. Let me now go across to Shri at this point. Shri, a very candid Daniel there expressing his frustration as a Canadian, saying that, it is embarrassing and frustrating if Canada has come to a point where a bunch of pro-Khalistan extremists have become so important in that country's polity that the Prime Minister, in a sense, acts in a way that would suggest that he's almost shielding them while messing with a country like India?
So Daniel used a very powerful phrase, Neha. He said, reporters like him who have been writing on the Khalistan terrorists in Canada and their activities, and how from espousing Khalistani statehood, they have actually gone into gang activities, which includes, trading in arms, drugs, prostitution, hired guns for murder, all kinds of activities. He's saying that people like him, the journalists like him, are screaming into a void, which is heartbreaking, because this is a huge issue which Canada is facing. And the fact that the political establishment there, has taken no cognizance of it, and even their own journalists, well-minded journalists who are doing factual, objective reporting, they are not being heard. It's all falling on deaf ears. So this is truly, truly tragic for the sake of Canada, Neha. It is no secret that some of the most violent gangs are to be found in British Columbia, or Vancouver in specific, which is the biggest city. There are many gangs that operate there, and most of them are, breakaways and factions of older gangs. And we have new gang members killing the older bosses. There are so many such cases. It is all well documented. There are academic research that have happened on it. There are reports which have been presented. So it's not as if the Canadian government is not aware of these issues or what really these so-called Khalistanis are up to. It is simply boggles my mind that Canada has not been able to address this. And Daniel said that it is not a political dividend issue, but in the case of Justin Trudeau, definitely there is a political aspect to it, because his government survival depends on support from NDP, Jagmeet Singh's support, and Jagmeet Singh has been openly pro-Khalistani. So I think it's time politicians like Justin Trudeau, and we would urge the conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to actually look at this. There should be some sort of a judicial inquiry that happens in Canada by Canadian judges, retired judges, on what exactly are these Khalistani groups doing. Let that report then be presented to the Canadian Parliament, to the people of Canada, for them to see for themselves what exactly is going on. Because if the best efforts of people like Daniel and other journalists who have spent decades, not years, but decades, exposing the nefarious activities of Khalistani activists in Canada, then it's God save Canada, literally, Neha.
Absolutely. And you know what Justin Trudeau doesn't realize is that he is doing more damage to Canada than to India. And our external affairs minister made it abundantly clear in New York yesterday that these double standards and cherry picking when it comes to matters of territorial integrity are not going to wash anymore. We live in a different world now. Daniel is back with us. Daniel, we'd lost your link there momentarily.
I know.
Glad to have you back up. We appreciate the candor with which you've expressed your frustration as a journalist, as a Canadian, somebody who's been reporting on this issue, and the fact that everything that people like you say falls on deaf ears in Canada. But let's just look at where Justin Trudeau is placed today. His approval ratings are plummeting by the day, as you mentioned. There was a poll recently which said that if an election were to be held in Canada today, the principal opposition leader would have a landslide win. Trudeau, in the last few weeks alone, has managed to antagonize India, the Jews, Poland, because of the fact that one Nazi was honored in the Canadian Parliament, no less, and Canadian Muslims. And I'm sure that there are other names that I am forgetting to mention right now. He is being seen increasingly as an apologist for terrorists and secessionist forces. And there are many commentators, not just in India, but in the West too, Daniel, who believe that not only has Trudeau cut a very sorry figure with what he's done, having dealt a body blow to India-Canada ties with the reckless manner in which he's acted, but he looks increasingly like a lonely man on the global stage today. We're talking about the Five Eyes intelligence sharing, but there are many who are saying all that countries like the US have done is to issue boilerplate statements. Nobody's really rushed to Trudeau's defense. Do you believe that Trudeau is a man who is increasingly isolated today, both globally and domestically? And where do you think he's going with this?
Okay, the answer, yes and yes on the isolation. Where do I think Justin Trudeau's going with this? No one can understand Justin Trudeau's motivations or whatever. So I don't even try. It's a pathway towards insanity. But this isn't new. I mean, Justin Trudeau's been heavily isolated on the global stage. There's always the clips of him at the UN, and no one wants to shake his hand. He's off there. And I think this is a decent crash course in geopolitics and what you can call wokeness, because I guess that's a term everyone knows, sort of far left progressive ideology. It doesn't jive. In order to be a good ally, you have to be a strong country. And then if you keep yourself strong, you can then help your allies. But Justin Trudeau, instead of, upping Canadian manufacturing, getting our resources to market, leveraging trade and relations with different countries, he's going around sort of enforcing progressive values on a global stage, which is great if you're a sociology university professor and this is your life's goal, but it's not great if you're kind of a regular person. And we've seen sort of where like the rubber hits the road with him. Expect the country of Italy to take a pot shot at us sometime because he lectured Giorgia Meloni on her lack of progressive social values. He did the same to Poland. Now he's doing it to India. So he has a history of hectoring our allies who have governments that are not as socially progressive, let's say, on the stuff, if you don't have a diversity, equity, and inclusion department and 7 pride parades a day, this is Trudeau's #1 geopolitical aim is to lecture you on that. But this isn't good politics at all. This isn't good geopolitiks. You should be hard on your enemies and nice to your allies. Instead, we're hard on our allies and soft on our enemies. From the CCP in China, the Khalistani terrorism isn't the only type he's enabled. The second worst terrorist attack in Canadian history was the downing of flight PS752 by the IRGC in the Islamic Republic. Trudeau used taxpayer dollars to defend the Iranian government in court against Canadian citizens that were murdered. A friend of mine, Merzad, who lost his son on that flight, walked all the way from Toronto to Ottawa to meet with the Prime Minister. He promised he would list the IRGC in its entirety as a terrorist organization in our country. He told Merzad, hey, you know what? In order to make us do this, just, be quiet for a bit, stop tweeting, and then go home. So when he had the international media on him, Merzad thought, oh, good, I got a promise from the Prime Minister. He's finally going to get some justice for my murdered son by this terrorist group. And then he left Ottawa, he left the cameras, and Justin Trudeau did nothing. So this is a man who is soft on terrorism, invited Joshua Boyle, gave Omar Carter $10.5 million, and had the audacity to manipulate and lie to a grieving father who had just walked across the country to meet with him. This is Justin Trudeau. So of course this guy's increasingly isolated. The Speaker of the House just went, he's thrown everyone under the bus he can. He never takes responsibility for his actions.
And in fact, he ended up, far from apologizing for honoring a Nazi, he ended up blaming it on Russia, calling it Russian propaganda. What does Russia have to do with the Canadian Parliament honoring a Nazi?
I mean, this is a new thing we have in the West, where the political left will kind of silence a lot of criticism as like Russian disinformation. We get so polarized in the West, everything becomes left and right. Okay, the Russia is now right, Ukraine is left. Like I'm pro-Ukraine sovereignty. Like I'm old school, sort of conservative. Like I don't think we should allow Russian aggression. Call me crazy for agreeing with Ronald Reagan on a lot of things. But this is just a thing Justin Trudeau's been saying. You're alt-right, you're neo-Nazis, doctors are tax cheats, farmers are tax cheats. It's a cult of personality that's left. It's just Justin Trudeau's cult of personality. And unfortunately, the largest membership group of the cult of personality is mainstream Canadian journalists. So that's helped prop him up. But he's so isolated and narcissistic and just compulsively immature that it doesn't even surprise Canadians at this point, the levels to which he'll draw. Something we all saw with our own eyes, he called Russian disinformation. And it just makes a joke. He embarrassed Volodymyr Zelensky. He undermined the Ukrainian war effort. The guy has to go. But he's so narcissistic, and Jagmeet Singh's so ideologically hardline. I mean, this is Jagmeet Singh's greatest week ever. Like, he's like, great, we get to start a fight with India. He's over the moon, so he's not going to want to leave anytime soon. And Trudeau probably won't want to leave anytime soon because I think he likes being the leader. He might step down in 2025 because he did 10 years and he's tired and he's the greatest guy ever. But I mean, it's just an absolute disaster within Canadian politics right now, and it's getting worse and worse and worse by the day. And I'm sorry, India, that you have to deal with Justin Trudeau, but just think of what we have to deal with for the last 8 years.
I love your candor. I have to say that, Daniel, really. And trust me, I'm no apologist for Russia, but the least that Justin Trudeau could have done for Nazigate is to have offered an apology. The man hasn't done that. Yep. Let's be very clear. Yes, the Speaker has resigned. Justin Trudeau called it deeply embarrassing. I don't think he's offered an apology. But, looking at the larger picture, Daniel, you are talking about his growing unpopularity and isolation. Let me ask you this question. In fact, it's interesting. I also read an editorial whose headline was, "Walk away, Trudeau. Canada's love affair with you is over." We'll have to, of course, wait perhaps till 2025 to find out if Canada's love affair with Justin Trudeau is well and truly over. But coming back to geopolitics and the diplomatic fallout that this has had on India-Canada ties, there are many foreign policy analysts, Daniel, who are saying that Justin Trudeau has messed with the wrong country at the wrong time over the wrong issue. Apart from the fact that India is, of course, the world's largest democracy, we have strong credentials today as, an upholder of not just democratic values, but as, a bridge builder, a country that can bring, various divisive forces together, as we saw with the recent stupendous success of the G20 summit, how we managed to bring the West and Russia and China all on the same page. India has a growing global stature. There are countries like the United States who are going out of their way to woo India today. Also because, of course, they see it as a countervailing force against China in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific. And then there are those who say, you know, this isn't really an India-Canada problem. This is an India-Justin Trudeau problem. You know, would it be facetious to say that this will all go away if Justin Trudeau were to be voted out of office tomorrow? How big a blow is this for India-Canada ties, and where do they go from here, Daniel, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, they're not going into a positive. I mean, I think this is an India-Justin Trudeau problem with the side of Jagmeet Singh. That's how I would probably put it there. I mean, I think there's two bad actors in this circle that are, because again, they're in a coalition in all but name only. It's bad for relations. Now, Canada has 100 years of solid, I think amazing foreign policy and diplomacy prior to Justin Trudeau. So I have faith in this country that we can turn it around once he's out of there. And, you know, get this back on track. We just need a government to treat the Khalistani issue seriously. And I think a lot of this will go away. You know, we can all both offer some vague, nebulous statements about trying harder to get to the bottom of whatever. And we can both give each other a slap on the wrist and write a letter to the UN and then sign a trade deal. And it can go away. I do think that. But I think you're right. This is sort of messing with India at the wrong time. And this is a case where maybe I think we mistook Narendra Modi for Rahul Gandhi. And now we stepped on a rake and it hit us in the face.
Okay, that is very, very interesting, Daniel. You know, I will come back to you in just a moment. But, you know, Shri, let me come back to you now. And I just want to read out a few names that I have on a list that we have compiled. You know, it is, of course, very clear that India has denied any involvement in the killing of Nijjar. And it's very interesting that the Washington Post reported just yesterday, and we discussed it extensively on our show, Shri, that it is Canadian authorities that have completely botched the investigation into the murder. They have acted like the Keystone Cops, as I keep saying. But keeping that issue aside for a moment, you know, talking about Western hypocrisy, which countries like India have been at the receiving end of multiple times, I just want to draw the attention of our viewers to, you know, the assassinations that have been carried out by countries like the United States over the years. We all know that the US has conducted drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan to target suspected terrorists. There were often civilian casualties, as we know. These strikes happened without the explicit permission of the host countries. We cannot forget the killing of Osama bin Laden, which happened in Abbottabad. If we could just have that graphic up on the screen, please, which is in Pakistan. The Pakistan army was livid because nobody in that country knew that America was going to do this. Anwar al-Awlaki, a US citizen and alleged Al-Qaeda propagandist, was killed in a drone strike by the US in Yemen in 2011. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, leader of ISIS, was killed in Syria by US Special Forces in 2019. We know about the famous case of General Qasem Soleimani, top Iranian military commander, who was killed in a US drone strike in Iraq in 2020. In 2015, the UK acknowledged that it conducted a drone strike in Syria that killed 2 British citizens who were fighting for ISIS. French operations have been held in Mali and the broader Sahel region. These were called counter-terrorism operations. So when these countries, the Fair Eyes countries, tell somebody that they are deeply concerned about these assassinations being carried out, you know, I mean, surely they need to look within before they express deep concern about what's happening elsewhere, pointing fingers at another country.
No, that is the point, isn't it, Neha? The Western hypocrisy when it comes to this issue of terrorism. You know, why did US have to go into Abbottabad and pull this man out of his home middle of the night and shoot him dead? It's because Pakistan not only denied that Osama bin Laden was, you know, in their country, they said, we don't know where he is. Well, the fact was he was living within the army area, being protected by the local army. So let us assume for a minute, and you know, even if the allegations, let's say Five Eyes Intelligence is making against India, that it was India which eliminated Nijjar. Now the question that you need to ask is, why did India even have to do something like that? I mean, India is a country which has been independent for 75 years, and we have absolutely no track record of doing anything like this. So if I'm not saying that India did it. I'm saying that even if in a scenario, if India actually was responsible, or anyone, forces sympathetic to India were responsible for this, I think Canada and the Western world needs to ask itself why. And the answer is that for 40 years, India has been giving evidence after evidence after evidence to Canada to say that how the so-called Khalistani freedom fighters in Canada are actually terrorists who are not just conducting violence in India. They're also conducting drugs trade. They're helping Pakistan. They're in cahoots with ISI and making weapons available to people who are acting against India's interests. So repeatedly, India, for not just 4 years, 5 years, but for 40 years, from the time of Indira Gandhi, we have been giving this evidence to Canada, and Canada has done precious little. So I don't think the Western countries which are objecting to any kind of state action, even if it is true that India was involved, I'm not saying that India is involved, but even if it is true, they have absolutely no moral right to object to India protecting its borders, its sovereignty, and keeping its people safe from terrorists who could be a potential threat to our safety, our peace, and our prosperity, Neha.
Absolutely. Daniel, the cases that I've mentioned, that's just the tip of the iceberg. These are just a handful of cases among the many, many, many cases that have been reported over the years, and many targeted killings, as we know, have also gone unreported. Hypocrisy much? Like I said on the show yesterday, and I want to say it again. The attitude of countries like Canada seems to be, our terrorist is a terrorist, while your terrorist is an innocent, law-abiding Canadian citizen. Poor plumber.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of a complicated issue, and it's one of those things where we all know people do it, and yes, it's wrong, but we all do it because we have to. There is a difference between a clandestine assassination on a random country and in an allied country, right? So these are two different things, and every country is allowed to be upset because it's embarrassing that this needs to happen here. So I think you can understand the Canadian perspective that, we have to protect some sort of sovereignty. Now, the smart thing to do is when someone like Hardeep Singh Nijjar is killed, and even if you had evidence that the Indian government's behind it, a smart thing to do as Canada would probably just be to pretend it was Khalistani gang violence, because this guy's not going to get sympathy from the global community, right? It'd be one thing if this was a 12-year-old girl who the Indian government assassinated because she was, the act said something about Khalistan and it went viral. That would be a major thing. But when it's a guy who's on video supporting suicide bombings, armed, insurrection, his lawyers running around telling Hindus to get out of the country, sorry, like no one in America, Australia, or any part of the world is going to be like, oh no, we have to cut ties with India because of this guy. And also domestically in India, like when there's someone talking about destroying India and killing all the Hindus, are the Indian people going to turn against the government that got rid of that guy, hypothetically? No. So it is a complicated geopolitical issue. It's one of the things that we all kind of accept happens, but we don't talk about it because it's kind of smarter not to talk about it in some senses. But we are led by Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, so we're going to do the stupidest possible thing we can, and we're going to start a diplomatic row over a guy who is either killed in a Khalistani gang violence or killed by the Indian government pretending to be Khalistani gang violence because we have a rampant problem of Khalistani gang violence. Either way, the big problem in Canada, you boil it down, it's Khalistani gang violence. And if we're going to say that the people we must protect in Canada are the Khalistani gangsters, well, let's do something about the Khalistani gangsters who are trying to kill them. And that's where it gets back to. So, yeah, listen, there's hypocrisy for every country in foreign policy. All countries act in their own self-interest and the interests of their people. That's what you expect them to do. And they have special rules for themselves and different rules for other people. It is what it is. It would be nice if we could all get along and North Korea wasn't crazy and the Islamic Republic of Iran wasn't trying to take over the world. It would be nice to live in that world, but we live in a more complicated world, and managing these alliances takes some skill, and I don't really think Canada has enough, let's say, diplomatic skill in what remains of the corpse of the Liberal Party to fix this situation. So listen, I understand the hypocrisy, but if we get into it, India's been hypocritical geopolitically, China's been, Australia's been. It's just the nature of countries existing, having, in your case, 1.5 billion people managing these things in different alliances. So I get it. You can always point out the hypocrisies. And yes, Western nations are more likely to give other Western nations the benefit of the doubt over India. And that can rightfully be a bit maddening when you're on the other side of it. But the real issues here is the extremism and the ideological anti-India sentiment that's growing throughout our institutions. That's I think where the real problem is, and we can get into esoteric conversations about clandestine foreign operations. But at the end of the day, each country is going to do what they want to do, and it would be better if we could solve this diplomatically. It would be better if we extradited Hardeep Singh Nijjar to face crime. It would be better if we had cracked on him for all his sort of kill stuff. But such is the state of modern Canada that we're tripping over our own feet on literally every issue. And again, this scandal's been replaced by an even more ridiculous scandal. And who knows in 2 weeks, if Justin Trudeau will bring literal ISIS members into Parliament to be honored for their service to our country. Who knows what the government's got planned here? But listen, I get it from the Indian perspective, but geopolitically, everyone's hypocritical at some point. So this isn't the big issue for me.
Okay, and I understand the larger point that you're making. And Daniel, since you have to leave, I will ask you this final question. The likes of Hardeep Singh Nijjar have called for violence against Indians. They have talked about balkanizing India. This man was wanted for targeted killings in the Indian state of Punjab. As a matter of fact, Indian agencies have handed over nothing less than 25 dossiers on many of these Khalistani terrorists over the years and sought their extradition. Not one of those extradition requests have been accepted by Canada. Now there is this man called Panun, the founder of Sikhs for Justice, who has been operating with impunity from Canadian soil, openly issuing threats to Indian diplomats, painting a target on their back, calling for violence against them. He's responsible for, the vandalism that happened at Indian missions in recent months. He's threatening Hindus in Canada, asking them to leave Canada and come back to India. And guess what? Justin Trudeau thinks this is freedom of speech. That is infuriating. How is India supposed to respond to that? And finally, Daniel, where do you see this issue going next? How do you see things panning out in the next few days?
I see this government spiraling in a pit of disaster, running around in circles, blaming everyone but themselves in an absolute catastrophe. So that's what I predict over the next week of Canadian politics. There might have been a secret cabinet meeting last night, so maybe they'll come out with a new plan. I don't know. But in terms of this pandemic, this is what I'm talking about. Like, you can't have guys running around openly threatening people. I am the most free speech absolutist guy you will find in the country of Canada. I don't believe in hate speech laws. I do believe there are violent, horrible things you can say that violate other laws, right? Incitement to violence, that's a crime. Harassment, that's a crime. Targeted harassment. And this guy's broken all of the general conventions of speech outside the hate speech laws. He's broken. And then add on to that, Canada has really strong hate speech laws, and they're not being enforced on this guy. Like, this is the maddening stuff. And I see it, and it's not just the Hindu community. I mean, I'm part of the Jewish community. I have seen many radical Islamist organizations invite speakers to openly call for the death of Jews, and they added Hindus in there as well. And we're talking about death, slay them one by one, spare not one of them, real crazy stuff, inviting radical speakers from different things to say, genocidal things about Jews and Hindus. Never once has the government taken any action. In fact, when activists and journalists raise awareness of these various things, we're often called far-right, extremist, Islamophobic, racist, for bringing up the concerns of these other communities. So in my view, in my opinion, since 2015, Canada has been a culture where there is a tacit endorsement of extremism and violence. along those lines. And it's not healthy for the country. And it's been cancerous inside Canada. It's been a cancer in Canada, but now it's a metastatic tumor. It's metastasized. It's gone out of our country. It is now bringing us foreign problems with India. And there are other governments that are not going to like, because there are extremist elements. And if they're allowed to flourish, extremists will flourish where they want to flourish. And Canada is a very easy place. If you're an extremist and you don't speak English, right, and you want to go on TV and kill and say, these people, let's get them, let's do violence, Canada's the place to be. We're going to do nothing about it under Justin Trudeau. It's an open base for violence and extremism, as long as it's not sort of a center-right Western type of extremism. No traditional, Christian groups can go out and say kill. But if you're part of what the Liberals will perceive as a minority, you can threaten and harass any other minority you want, because the Canadian media won't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of what is a Hindu thing, what is Khalistani, the Tamil Tigers, all this stuff. We are too sort of afraid to have these conversations that it's allowed extremism to flourish in this vacuum of
again, like I keep saying, extremely candid of you. I really appreciate that, Daniel. But before I go back to Sri, final question to you. What will it take for India-Canada ties to come back on track? They've really taken a hit. Some say they've hit rock bottom. Would you agree?
An election of a new prime minister. It's an election of a new prime minister. It's going to be bad, and with Justin and Jagmeet, it's going to be bad. And sorry, if you can ride it out with us as a country, we'd appreciate that. And then once these two ding dongs are gone, it should improve.
Absolutely. I wish Justin Trudeau would remember that this is not how friendly countries behave with each other. This is not how two democracies behave with each other. But on that note, Daniel Boatman, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and very, very candid perspective on this issue.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Well, I look forward to having you in the studio next time. And I can assure you, the visa won't be a problem, Daniel.
All right. I'm going to get that couch ready.
Okay, he wants cash. All right, Daniel.
I said couch. I said that couch.
I said sorry, did you say couch? Yeah. Sorry, I heard that in.
But if you want to give me a big bag of cash too, I will accept it.
You wouldn't mind that terribly, though, would you? All right, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us on Global Lens tonight. Thank you. Sri, let me come back to you. You were raising your hand at that time. We needed to let Daniel go, so I needed to put that last question to him. Please go ahead, make your point.
No, so actually I was going to ask Daniel, but what we are hearing from a very senior and reputed journalist from Canada is that Canada's political correctness, its desire to be seen as a politically correct country, has now become a big liability for itself, where it is, failing to draw a line between freedom of expression and the freedom of people to actually foment terror activities on their soil. So I think this is a question which the Canadian people, the voters, have to consider, Neha, because they have to realize that the people who are passing themselves off as freedom fighters or activists are actually not that they are the people behind a lot of violence. They are the people behind a lot of drug trafficking, prostitution, shipment of arms, trading in arms, and hired guns for killing. So I think people of Canada, the voters of Canada, have to wake up to this reality. And I hope journalists like Daniel will be able to present this picture. And he said there might be some sort of a political change that comes along based on this. And therefore, countries are able to, appreciate the freedom of the people, but at the same time say that this is not, terrorism is not what we will allow and, let you do, even if you're a citizen of Canada or any other country, Neha.
Is Justin Trudeau listening? That is the million-dollar question. A quick clarification before we wrap up. Shri, I hope to have you in the studio as well, not just Daniel.
My pleasure, Neha. Anytime.
Look forward to that. Thank you so much, Sri, for joining us as always on Global Lens and sharing your valued perspective on what has clearly been the biggest story of the fortnight, the escalating tensions between India and Canada. This is a story we will continue to track very closely here on Global Lens. That's all the time we have on the show tonight. Thanks so much for watching.